The morning sky looked clear when passengers began boarding Flight 27, a normal commercial flight heading across the country. People moved in slowly, dragging bags, checking seat numbers, adjusting their jackets. It was just another travel day, and nothing about the cabin felt unusual. Families were settling in, business travelers were opening their laptops, and a few tired passengers were already leaning back, hoping to catch a little sleep. Among them was a quiet woman sitting near the window in seat 9A. She carried a small black backpack and a calm expression. Her eyes stayed on the runway as if she was studying something far away. No one paid much attention to her. She looked like any other traveler who preferred silence over conversation. The flight attendant made the usual announcements, reminding everyone to fasten their seatbelts and keep their phones in airplane mode. The engine started, humming with steady power. A few children clapped softly when the plane began rolling forward. Everything felt normal, almost too normal. Even the crew thought it would be an uncomplicated day. The captain greeted the passengers warmly. His voice relaxed as he promised a smooth flight with clear skies. When the plane lifted off the ground, there was a calm stillness in the cabin. Passengers began arranging their belongings, ordering drinks, or getting comfortable. The woman in 9A kept her hands folded in her lap and her gaze steady on the horizon. She did not speak to anyone, but there was something about her posture still, controlled, almost trained, that a few people noticed without knowing why. To most, she was only a quiet woman traveling alone. But the captain glanced at the passenger list and paused for a second. Her name was there, simple and ordinary. Nothing that should raise concern. Still, something about the way she carried herself made him look twice when she boarded. As the plane climbed smoothly, the flight attendants moved through the aisle, offering drinks and snacks. They passed 9A, noticing the woman politely shake her head each time. She did not seem nervous, just focused. A man across the aisle glanced at her a few times. He could not explain it, but he sensed she was different from the rest of the passengers. Maybe it was her calmness. Maybe it was the way she seemed to listen more than she looked. 1 hour into the flight, the captain received a message from air traffic control. It was short and unclear, but it made his expression change. He adjusted his headset, asked for confirmation, and waited. A second message came. Then a third. The co-pilot looked at him, confused. Something unusual was happening outside their aircraft. Something that did not match the peaceful blue sky they were flying through. Passengers continued to relax, unaware of the shift in atmosphere inside the cockpit. The woman in 9A, however, lifted her head slowly, as if she sensed something before anyone spoke. Her eyes moved from the window to the aisle, watching the crew with quiet attention. She took a slow breath, her expression steady but sharper now. In the cockpit, the captain received one more transmission, this one coded. It included a specific request, a question asking whether anyone on board matched a certain call sign. The captain read the message twice. The call sign mentioned was rare, known only to a few. It belonged to someone with a unique background, someone respected by high-level military units. But why would that call sign appear here, on a normal commercial flight? He stepped out of the cockpit, his face neutral but tense. The passengers looked up briefly, assuming he was just checking the cabin. He scanned the rows carefully. When his eyes reached seat 9A, the quiet woman looked back at him, not questioning, not surprised. Almost as if she already knew. He approached her gently and spoke in a low voice so others would not hear. The passengers around them leaned closer without meaning to. They could sense something unusual unfolding. The woman remained calm, listening, then nodded once. A very small, controlled nod. The kind that told him she understood completely. The captain did not reveal her identity, and she did not offer any explanation. But she opened her backpack slightly, just enough to show him a small card with a symbol on it, a sign that only a trained eye would recognize. The captain inhaled sharply when he saw it. He stepped back, almost out of respect. He returned to the cockpit quickly, and the woman straightened her posture. She knew what was coming next. Outside the aircraft, two distant shapes were approaching fast across the sky. Sleek, powerful, unmistakable. F-22 Raptors. They closed in smoothly, taking formation on each side of the plane. Passengers gasped when they looked out the windows and saw the fighter jets. A sudden wave of whispers spread across the cabin. Some thought it was a drill. Others thought something was wrong with their flight. But the woman in 9A did not panic. She simply watched them with steady eyes. She knew why they were there. She knew what they recognized. The F-22 pilots made visual contact with her through the window. And in that moment, their posture shifted. Even inside the jets, even across the sky, even without speaking a word, those pilots snapped to attention. Asterisk, for a long moment, no one inside the commercial jet understood what was happening. Passengers pressed their faces against the windows, whispering in confusion as the two F-22 Raptors glided into tight formation alongside the plane. Their metallic bodies shimmered against the sunlight, flying so close that people could see the movement inside their cockpits. Some travelers reached for their phones, only to remember they were in airplane mode. Others held their breath, unsure whether to feel afraid or impressed. But the woman in 9A did not move. She watched the fighter jets the way someone recognizes an old memory rather than a surprise. There was no panic in her eyes, only a steady focus that even the people near her could sense. The man across the aisle stared at her, noticing how calm she remained. Something about her composure felt stronger than the roaring engines outside. Inside the cockpit, the captain and co-pilot exchanged glances filled with disbelief. The coded message they had received earlier was now making sense, piece by piece. Air traffic control had not been worried about a threat. They had been trying to confirm something, someone on board. And when the captain relayed the details, he could almost hear the shift in tone, the sudden formality from the other end of the communication. It was the kind of voice reserved only for military protocol. The captain tapped a few controls, trying to maintain steady flight while keeping an eye on the Raptors outside. They were not escorting the plane in a threatening way. Their formation felt more like protection, respect, a salute in motion. The captain understood one thing clearly now. This was no ordinary passenger sitting in 9A. Meanwhile, the tension inside the cabin grew heavier. Conversations overlapped. Parents held their children closer. People began looking at each other as if searching for answers. One woman whispered, asking if there was a danger. A man behind her suggested maybe the plane had entered restricted airspace. Another assumed there must have been a security alert. But all these guesses felt small compared to the truth that was slowly forming. The quiet woman in 9A finally unbuckled her seatbelt. Her movements were graceful and slow, drawing attention without trying. She stood up carefully, steadying herself against the seat in front of her. A flight attendant approached her gently, almost nervously. The woman nodded softly, reassuring her with a look that carried a strange mix of authority and warmth. She walked down the aisle as passengers moved slightly aside. Some stared, others pretended not to look, but curiosity filled every seat. There was something unmistakable about her presence now, something that made people sit straighter as she passed. When she reached the front of the cabin, the captain opened the cockpit door for her without hesitation. The passengers gasped quietly. No one was ever allowed in there during flight. But she entered with a calm step, and the door closed behind her. Inside the cockpit, the co-pilot immediately removed his headset when she appeared. He did not know who she was exactly, but he felt the need to show respect. The captain explained the coded messages and how the F-22s had been dispatched with urgency. The woman listened without speaking, her gaze steady on the radar screens. Then, without raising her voice, she told them to open a specific frequency. Her tone was not commanding, but confident like someone who had spoken on such channels many times before. The captain obeyed. When the frequency opened, a deep silence filled the cockpit. She leaned forward and spoke two calm words, the call sign. It was unique, short, and carried a weight that even the co-pilot felt without understanding its meaning. The radio remained silent for a second. Then a voice came through, firm and respectful. It was the lead F-22 pilot. He repeated her call sign with a tone that almost sounded like disbelief. The co-pilot watched her carefully. She did not smile, but her eyes softened. It was clear the pilots outside knew exactly who she was. Whoever she had been in the past, her call sign held enough authority to make trained fighter pilots straighten their posture mid-air. The lead pilot requested visual confirmation. The woman stepped toward the small side window near the cockpit, angling herself so the fighter jet could see her clearly. The F-22 tilted slightly in response, a subtle maneuver only someone paying attention would notice. The pilot inside snapped to attention again, raising two fingers in a small, respectful gesture. Back in the cabin, passengers reacted to the sudden tilt of the fighter jet. Many gasped, assuming something serious was happening. But the movement was simply a salute one, meant only for her. The captain asked gently if she wanted him to make an announcement to the passengers. She paused, thinking. Then she shook her head. Not yet. She preferred silence for now. The co-pilot, still trying to piece everything together, finally gathered the courage to ask a careful question. He did not ask her name. He did not ask why the F-22s knew her. Instead, he asked if she needed anything from them. She answered quietly, "Just keep the flight steady. They're here for reassurance, not risk." Her voice carried calm certainty, and both pilots felt their nerves settled out outside. The F-22s held their formation, loyal and precise. And inside the cabin, the passengers had no idea that a single call sign spoken softly from the cockpit had changed everything about their flight. The cabin grew quieter as the minutes passed. Even the children who had been restless earlier now sensed the shift in the atmosphere. Parents whispered to them softly, trying not to let their own worry show. Every pair of eyes drifted toward the windows where the F-22 Raptors held their positions with flawless precision. It was a sight no one on a routine commercial flight expected to witness. Some passengers filmed quietly despite phones being in airplane mode, wanting proof that the moment was real. Others simply stared, feeling their hearts beat harder with each passing second. But the woman from 9A, now seated in the cockpit, watched everything with calm focus. The captain guided the aircraft steadily through the clear sky, while the co-pilot kept glancing at her as though she carried answers he did not know how to ask for. She did not seem bothered by their curiosity. Instead, she studied the F-22s, reading their gentle turns and exact positions, as if she understood every silent message they were sending. After a few minutes, air traffic control reached out again. This time their tone was different, formal, respectful, almost cautious. They informed the captain that a restricted air corridor had been cleared specifically for their flight. That had never happened before, not in routine travel, not without serious cause. The captain exchanged a look with the co-pilot, and both knew the adjustment in flight path had nothing to do with danger. It had everything to do with the presence of the woman sitting beside them. She listened to the update, then asked calmly, "How long until we reach the new corridor?" "About 12 minutes, the captain replied. She nodded gently. "Keep your altitude steady. They'll adjust around us." Her confidence was so natural that the captain found himself trusting her without hesitation. He had flown for years, handled emergencies, and trained countless hours, yet something about her presence gave him a level of reassurance he could not explain. Meanwhile, the passengers remained trapped in their own theories. A student whispered loudly that maybe the plane was being escorted due to a technical problem. Another guessed it was a government drill. A man in row 17 insisted that someone important must be on board. His voice grew louder as he repeated the idea, drawing attention from those sitting nearby. One flight attendant tried to calm the passengers by offering water and checking in with anyone who looked nervous. But deep down, even she felt uneasy. She had seen the woman from 9A walk into the cockpit without resistance. That alone hinted at something far beyond ordinary procedure. The murmurs grew louder when the F-22 on the right side dipped slightly, then climbed back into formation. It was almost like a coded signal, though no one in the cabin could interpret it. The woman in the cockpit, however, looked at the maneuver and understood immediately. She leaned closer to the window, confirming the subtle shift. "They're waiting for the final clearance," she murmured, more to herself than to the pilots. The co-pilot blinked. "Clearance for what?" She did not answer right away. Instead, she turned toward him with a soft, steady expression, one that held both reassurance and deep experience. "For now, just keep your heading. They're protecting the corridor ahead." Her answer only increased the mystery. Back in the cabin, tension slowly blended with curiosity. A teenager sitting near the front turned to his mother and whispered, "Why would fighter jets protect us? We're just normal people." The mother squeezed his hand, unable to find a comforting explanation. Passengers kept glancing towards seat 9A, now empty. The young man who had been studying her earlier felt a strange sense of anticipation. Whoever she was, she carried a presence that did not fit an ordinary traveler. His thoughts raced as he tried to remember every detail about her. The calm posture, the focused eyes, the way the captain spoke to her in private, and the silent recognition from the jets outside. Suddenly, a soft announcement came through the speakers. It was not alarming, but steady. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. Everything is under control. We appreciate your cooperation." The captain avoided giving any details. He knew revealing more would only cause panic. In the cockpit, the woman leaned forward and spoke again on the secure frequency. Her tone remained calm, controlled, and unmistakably experienced. Whatever she said caused the lead F-22 to shift into a tighter, more formal alignment. The captain finally gathered the courage to ask, the question lingering in everyone's mind, "Your call sign?" He began carefully. They recognized it instantly. "How long has it been since you communicated on these channels?" She looked ahead, her expression turning thoughtful for the first time. "A few years. Are you still active?" The co-pilot asked softly. She gave a small exhale. "Not officially." The captain and co-pilot exchanged another silent look. "Not officially" was a phrase that carried 1,000 possibilities. It implied someone who once held significant authority, someone who had stepped away yet still commanded respect at the highest levels. Outside, the F-22 main pilot radioed again, this time with a tone similar to a salute spoken through the airwaves. "Lead confirming visual. Call sign verified. Corridor secured. Standing by for further instructions." The co-pilot swallowed hard. He had never heard fighter pilots sound like that, not even during joint exercises. The woman finally turned to the captain. "They won't leave until we land safely." "You mean they're escorting us the entire way?" She nodded. "Yes, it's protocol when someone with my call sign is detected on board." The captain stared at her. Speechless. Someone with her call sign. Someone important enough to move fighter jets, change flight paths, and shift the tone of air traffic control inside the cabin. The passengers sensed the aircraft entering smoother air, as if the sky itself had opened a clearer road for them. They did not know why, but in the cockpit, the woman knew exactly what and who was now watching over the flight. The flight entered the cleared air corridor, and the turbulence eased almost instantly. The passengers noticed the sudden smoothness and whispered again, wondering if it meant the situation was improving. But no one truly knew what situation they were in. The two F-22 Raptors continued flying closely on each side of the commercial jet, their sleek wings glinting under the sun. Their presence felt powerful yet strangely comforting, like guardians watching from the clouds. Inside the cockpit, the woman who once sat quietly in 9A remained calm as she monitored the Raptors and listened to the coded exchanges between pilots. She kept her breathing steady, her eyes sharp and aware of every detail happening around them. Even though she was not wearing a uniform, her posture alone carried a sense of duty that was impossible to ignore. The captain checked the cabin cameras and saw passengers still shifting nervously in their seats. He knew they deserved answers, but he also knew he could not reveal anything yet. Not until the woman gave permission or until they had landed safely. He looked at her again, trying to understand the history behind her silence and why her call sign held such weight. The co-pilot opened his mouth to ask another question but stopped himself. Something about her made him feel that some stories were too heavy to be pulled out without invitation. Still, he could not help glancing at her with admiration. She carried the calmness of someone who had seen storms far worse than this one. Suddenly, the radio crackled with a new message. The tone was deeper, more official. Not a fighter pilot. Someone higher. Call sign confirmed. Status request. The woman straightened slightly. The air inside the cockpit shifted like a silent drumbeat. She responded gently but clearly, using the same call sign the F-22s had reacted to earlier. The voice on the other end paused, then replied with a respect that even the captain felt through the static. "Ma'am, we were not informed of your presence. Is this a voluntary flight?" The captain's eyes widened. Voluntary flight? What did that mean? Who was she? Someone who required tracking? But the woman only said, "Yes, just a personal trip." Another pause. A long one. Then the voice answered, "Understood. We are maintaining escort protocol until you are safely on the ground." The line went silent again. The co-pilot let out a breath he did not realize he had been holding. "They're addressing you like you're still in command." She lifted her gaze for a moment, not denying it and not confirming it. "Old habits stay with people," she said softly. "Especially in the air." The captain felt a question rise inside him that he could no longer hold back. "Your call sign." It opened a restricted corridor, brought in an escort, and changed communication levels. "Can I ask, what happened before? Why would they react like that?" She did not answer immediately. Instead, she looked out the cockpit window toward the F-22 gliding beside them. The jet was so close she could see the pilot inside, watching her with unwavering attention. Finally, she spoke. "A long time ago, I led a team that flew missions where returning home wasn't guaranteed. My call sign wasn't about rank or fame. It came from something else. Something we survived together." The co-pilot's breath caught. "You were military?" She gave a small nod. "I stepped away after we lost too many. I chose silence instead of staying in the air." The captain didn't interrupt. Her voice carried weight, not sadness exactly, but the kind of quiet strength that grows from memories too heavy for ordinary conversation. She continued, "My team had a rule. If they ever saw my call sign again, they would protect the air around me, no matter where I was." The co-pilot blinked. "They're honoring that rule. Even now?" "Yes," she replied. "Even after all these years." Outside, the lead F-22 tilted slightly again, as if acknowledging her words. The small gesture held meaning, a salute only she understood. Back in the cabin, some passengers started calming down. A few even took photos of the Raptors, amazed by the once-in-a-lifetime view. But others still whispered in worry. One elderly woman asked a flight attendant if someone dangerous was on board. The attendant shook her head softly, not wanting to spread fear. The young man from earlier, who had watched the woman in 9A closely, kept replaying everything in his mind. The way she walked, the calm in her eyes, the escort jets outside. Something told him this moment was bigger than anything passengers could imagine. In the cockpit, the woman continued monitoring the jets when suddenly the radio sparked again, not with formality this time, but with a familiar voice. A voice that made her eyes widen the slightest bit. "Call sign. Is that really you?" She froze for a moment before answering quietly. "It's me." There was a long silence, then the voice came back, softer. "We thought you'd never fly again." Her breath tightened, just a little. "I didn't plan to." "Then why now?" the voice asked. She looked down, her fingers tightening around the armrest. "Because someone I cared for wanted me to return. Just once." The captain and co-pilot remained silent, realizing they were hearing something deeply personal, a piece of her past that she rarely allowed anyone to see. The voice on the radio spoke again, steady but filled with emotion. "We will get you home safely. Whatever it takes." The woman closed her eyes briefly, not in sadness but in acknowledgement of a promise she never expected to hear again. Outside, both F-22s tightened their formation with new purpose. The passengers had no idea why the skies around them suddenly felt more protected than ever. The sky ahead grew brighter as the plane continued through the protected corridor. The passengers had slowly adjusted to the presence of the F-22s, though none of them felt fully at ease. Every few minutes someone would look out the window again, half expecting the fighter jets to disappear, half hoping they would stay. The uncertainty in the cabin felt heavy, but strangely, no one panicked anymore. It was as if everyone understood, without being told, that someone important was guiding the situation. In the cockpit, the mood was different. The woman who had once been silent in 9A sat near the controls, her focus split between the plane's instruments and the Raptors flying beside them. She had not worn a uniform in years, but the air around her felt like discipline and experience. Even the captain found himself adjusting his posture when she spoke. The radio crackled again. This time the voice was softer than before, almost personal. The same pilot who recognized her call sign earlier spoke with a tone that held respect, but also something like relief. "You disappeared after the last mission. No one knew where you went." She kept her eyes on the horizon. "I needed silence." "You earned your silence," the pilot replied. "But you also earned the right to return without fear." The captain's eyebrows lifted at the word return. "Return to what?" "Return from what?" The co-pilot kept stealing glances at her, trying to put the pieces together. Whoever she was, she had carried a burden heavy enough to make her leave the skies entirely, before anyone could ask questions. The F-22 outside the left window rolled slightly, showing the underside of its wing. It was a subtle gesture, almost like a bow. A few passengers noticed and whispered louder now, unable to understand why a fighter jet would make such a respectful motion toward a commercial plane. The woman in the cockpit recognized it instantly. Her voice softened. "That's his way of telling me he's still here." The co-pilot leaned forward. "Still here? As in? Someone you knew?" She nodded slowly. "He flew in my unit. We trained together. We survived missions that changed everything. After our final operation, I left. He stayed, and now?" the captain asked quietly. She exhaled gently. "Now he's making sure this flight gets home safely." The radio clicked again, and the same pilot spoke not with military protocol, but with the honesty of someone speaking from memory. "You saved us that night. You saved more than you know. We never forgot." The woman did not respond right away. Her eyes softened with something quiet, something painful. She had left the skies because of loss, because of promises that cost too much. Hearing his voice again felt like touching an old scar that still carried warmth. "We all saved each other," she finally answered. "You know that." The co-pilot looked between them, realizing they were speaking of something too heavy for the present moment, yet deeply tied to why F-22s were escorting a commercial plane. Suddenly, the cockpit screen flashed. Air traffic control was requesting a status update. The captain gave the usual confirmation, keeping his voice calm. But the controller responded with something unexpected. Ground teams are preparing the landing zone earlier than scheduled. Additional units are standing by. The captain exchanged a look with the woman. Units? For what purpose? Security, the controller replied. Protocol following confirmation of her call sign. Passengers seated near the front watched as the captain stepped out of the cockpit briefly. He scanned the rows, looking for signs of distress. Most people were whispering anxiously, aware that something big was happening but still unsure if it meant danger or protection. One elderly man raised his hand as the captain passed. "Sir, are we safe?" The captain hesitated for only a moment, then answered with steady certainty. "Yes, you are absolutely safe." And somehow his confidence spread like a wave. People still looked worried, but they trusted his tone. When he returned to the cockpit, the woman looked at him with a question in her eyes. "The passengers?" "They're nervous," he said, "but they're holding together." She closed her eyes briefly, grateful for their calm. She knew her presence was the reason for the escort. She also knew her past could not be explained to a plane full of strangers. The sky carried secrets that did not belong in public stories. Outside, the lead F-22 suddenly shifted into a tighter pattern, signaling a change. The woman leaned closer to the window. "They're preparing for descent." The captain checked his instruments. "We're still far from the airport." "They'll guide us early," she replied. Protocol adjusts when a classified call sign is active. The co-pilot swallowed. "Your call sign. It wasn't just respected, was it?" She turned to him slowly. "It was protected." Before he could ask more, the radio opened one last time. The pilot's voice returned, steady but emotional. "We'll hold formation until you land, and it's good to hear your voice again." She breathed in softly, her eyes glimmering with something unspoken. "It's good to hear yours too." Then she added, quieter than before, "Thank you for keeping the promise." The pilot answered without hesitation, "We always will." Outside the window, the F-22 wing dipped once more, a final silent salute. Inside the cabin, the passengers saw the jets shift position and murmur again. Unaware that a reunion thousands of feet above, the Earth was guiding their flight home. The descent began earlier than expected, and the passengers felt the plane angle gently downward. A few people gripped their armrests, confused by the sudden change. Through the windows, the F-22s adjusted their formation instantly, one rising slightly above the commercial jet and the other shifting lower. Their movements were precise, almost choreographed, as if they had rehearsed this moment for years. Inside the cockpit, the captain double-checked the landing clearance. The air traffic controller's voice sounded unusually serious, giving instructions with pauses that suggested unseen preparations on the ground. The co-pilot swallowed, noticing the tension in the air, but the woman beside them stayed calm. Her breathing was steady, her posture unchanged. She had faced storms far worse than a guided descent. The radio clicked again, and the familiar pilot's voice returned. "We're monitoring the airspace. No threats detected. Corridor secure." The captain watched the woman's reaction. She didn't smile, but her eyes softened slightly, as though an invisible weight had shifted from her shoulders. The co-pilot couldn't help asking the question that had been building inside him. "Why did you stop flying? If your team respected you this much?" She remained silent for a long moment. The only sound was the hum of the engines and the steady presence of the F-22s outside. Finally she spoke slowly, choosing her words with care. "Because I lost someone. Someone important. Someone who flew under my command. She paused, her eyes drifting toward the window. After that day, the sky felt different. It felt heavier. I couldn't stay. The cockpit fell silent. Even the captain did not respond. He understood immediately. It wasn't fear that made her leave. It was grief. A grief deep enough to make someone walk away from the world they once belonged to. The F-22 pilot spoke again, almost as if he could feel the weight of her memory from miles away. "We all lost people that day," he said quietly. "But you carried the hardest part." She closed her eyes briefly. "Leadership has its price. And you paid more than anyone," the pilot replied. "That's why we still follow your call sign." It wasn't just a name. It was a promise. The co-pilot felt chills run through him. He had flown for years, but never had he heard fighter pilots speak with such emotion, such loyalty, over the radio. It made her story feel even more real. In the cabin, tension mixed with curiosity as the passengers felt the aircraft drop a little more. A teenager near the window pointed outside and whispered loudly that the jets were moving closer. A few heads turned, and whispers spread again. But one thing was obvious: no one felt afraid anymore. Somehow, the escort made people feel safer, even without understanding why it was happening. A flight attendant moved down the aisle, offering reassuring smiles. She didn't know the full story either, but she had seen enough to understand one thing. The woman from 9A was someone who mattered deeply to the pilots outside, back in the cockpit. The woman remained focused on the descent. She watched the altitude numbers dropping steadily, the clouds thinning as the ground came slowly into view. It felt strange to her, returning to the sky she had once left behind. This flight was never supposed to be more than a quiet trip. She had chosen 9A because she wanted the window, the view, the silence. She expected nothing unusual. And yet, the moment her call sign reached the radar, everything had changed. It reminded her that some stories never truly ended. Some bonds survived even the silence she had retreated into. The pilot's voice returned one last time before landing. "We'll escort you until the wheels touch the ground. After that, ground teams will take over." She nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "Understood." The captain adjusted the controls. "We'll be landing earlier than scheduled. The runway is being cleared for us." The co-pilot hesitated. "Is it cleared because of us? Or because of you?" She looked at him gently. "Both." As the aircraft descended lower, the outline of the airport came into view. Bright runway lights, emergency vehicles parked at a distance, ground staff standing by. To the passengers, it looked like a security drill. To the cockpit crew, it looked like a military protocol disguised inside a civilian setting. The plane leveled out for the final approach. Outside, the F-22s shifted into the tightest formation yet. Their silhouettes cut through the sky with disciplined grace, like shadows guarding each wing of the airliner. The woman leaned slightly toward the window, watching them. Her voice softened into something almost like gratitude. "They're protecting this flight because of a promise we made years ago," she said quietly. "We vowed that none of us would ever fly alone." The captain felt his breath catch. The co-pilot stared at her, realizing that her presence on the plane was not a threat, but a symbol, a reminder of loyalty that reached across years and thousands of feet in the air. The wheels dropped. The runway grew closer. The passengers braced quietly, unaware of the meaning behind the escort, and the woman in 9 no longer hidden, no longer silent, prepared to touch the ground with a sky full of memories, escorting her home. Asterisk. The landing gear locked into place with a soft thump, and the passengers straightened in their seats. The runway stretched wide beneath them, glowing under landing lights that seemed brighter than usual. No one knew that a special protocol had cleared the airspace for this single descent. No one knew that the silent woman from 9A had changed the ordinary flight the moment her call sign reached the radar. The captain guided the jet downward with slow, deliberate precision. Outside, the F-22s tightened into their final escort pattern, one slightly above, one slightly below, guarding the aircraft as if carrying out a mission they had waited years to complete. Their engines hummed like distant thunder, steady and unwavering. The touchdown came smoothly. The wheels kissed the runway with soft pressure, and the cabin let out a collective breath of relief. Passengers clapped, a common habit on long flights, but this applause felt more emotional, more grateful. They thought they were thanking only the captain. They didn't know the truth. They were also thanking the quiet woman whose past had followed her into the sky today. Once the aircraft slowed, the F-22s pulled away in a graceful upward arc. Passengers gasped when the jets dipped their wings in near-perfect unison. To them, it looked like a farewell gesture to the plane. To her, it was a final salute. The captain watched the motion with awe. "That's not standard," he whispered. "No," the woman said softly. "It's personal." Ground crews waited farther ahead, standing respectfully at a distance. Emergency vehicles lined the far edges of the runway, not because there was danger, but because the protocol insisted they be present whenever someone with her call sign was identified on board. Even now, the crew did not know the full story. They only followed instructions from people much higher than them. The captain turned to her once the plane began taxiing. "They'll probably want to speak with you when we park." "I know," she replied. "But I won't stay long." The co-pilot hesitated. "Are you sure you're ready? Coming back like this, it must bring back so much." "It does," she admitted. "But today reminded me that some things don't fade. Not loyalty, not memory." The aircraft rolled toward the gate where several officials stood waiting. Some wore suits. Some wore uniforms without name tags. Their faces carried seriousness mixed with respect. None of them approached the plane aggressively. They stood simply, waiting. Passengers noticed the gathering outside and began whispering again. A few wondered if someone dangerous was being removed. Others speculated that the flight had narrowly avoided a threat. But no one imagined the truth, that the person the officials waited for had once carried a call sign known in circles most civilians would never hear about. When the seatbelt sign turned off, the cabin erupted with movement. Bags came down, passengers stretched, but their eyes kept drifting toward the jet bridge where the officials waited. The young man who had been watching her earlier looked toward the cockpit door, hoping to see her walk through again. He didn't expect that she would step back into the cabin before exiting, but she did. She walked slowly down the aisle. The same calm woman she appeared to be hours ago, but now carrying the weight of revealed history. Passengers stared without meaning to. Something about her presence made them move aside naturally, creating space for her to walk. The elderly woman, who had been worried earlier, reached out gently. "Are we safe because of you?" she whispered. The woman smiled faintly, not with pride, but with quiet understanding. "You were always safe." The simple answer eased something in the passenger's heart. As she continued toward the exit, the young man from across the aisle stepped forward, his voice soft but curious. "Were those fighter jets for you?" She paused. Her eyes met his, and for a moment he felt as though he was speaking to someone who carried decades of sky behind her. "They were for a promise," she said. "One made a long time ago." He nodded slowly, not understanding everything but feeling the weight of her words. At the front of the plane, the captain and co-pilot stood waiting. Both felt honored in a way they couldn't describe. The captain extended his hand. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for trusting us, and for whatever you once did up there." She shook his hand gently. "You did well today. You kept everyone calm." Then she added something that surprised both of them. "And you reminded me what steady flying feels like. I missed that." The co-pilot smiled. "If you ever choose to return to the sky, I think many people would welcome you back." She gave a small, thoughtful nod. Maybe one day. She stepped out of the aircraft and into the jet bridge where the waiting officials straightened automatically. One of them saluted her out of pure instinct. She didn't ask for recognition, but she accepted the gesture with a nod. "Ma'am, we're prepared to escort you," one of them said. "Thank you," she replied. But no grand reception. "I'm just going home." They guided her quietly, respectfully, through a private corridor away from the crowd. Outside, the sky was slowly darkening, painted with the last colors of sunset. The faint roar of the departing F-22s echoed somewhere above. Fading into the evening dot, she paused at the window, watching the jets vanish into the horizon. Her reflection shimmered faintly against the glass older, wiser, but still carrying the same strength she once held in the air. The sky had called her unexpectedly today, and she had answered without meaning to. But as she walked away, one truth stayed with her. No one with her call sign ever truly flew alone.